Department that they are in the process of asking countries around the world to expel Iraqi diplomats and to protect Iraqi property, presumably embassy property. There's also a second tranche to this approach, and it indicates that the U.S. is trying to apply pressure to the Iraqi regime working outside of the country. CIA intelligence officials are hoping that these countries will also threaten to expel Iraqi dissidents, people who may have fled from Iraq, particularly scientists with knowledge of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. They want to pressure those people, say to them, look, we're going to send you back to Iraq, you fled the country, you won't last long there, we want the information about those weapons of mass destruction, if they exist, and where they might be. Obviously, this information very crucial to the Americans, who are still going to be in a position of having to justify this war by producing some of these weapons of mass destruction that they insist Saddam Hussein has. So that pressure tactics underway by U.S. intelligence agencies to try and extract that information so that if this war is successful for the Americans, they can go around, act on some of this information, and produce some of these weapons they insist exist. Kevin, an interesting turn of developments here.
It is, and we're going to go to David Viano in a moment, because this issue about expelling Iraqi diplomats is something that came up in the House of Commons here today. Just want to ask you one more question about the increasing numbers of countries that the Americans are claiming are part of this coalition of the willing. How much detail are they going into? Because I think 12 hours ago the number was 30. This morning it was 35. We heard President Bush at a cabinet meeting suggest it was 40. Are these claims, are they backing them up with specifics about which countries in the last 12 to 24 hours have actually supported the American action?
Well, we're waiting for the latest list from the Americans to see exactly who has signed up and joined on, but they're not really providing very many details about exactly what way these countries are supporting, whether it's just moral support, whether they're sort of providing supplies. They're really being sort of vague about that, but we are expecting an updated list that supposedly takes this coalition of the willing to over 40. Some people say it's really a coalition of the reluctant, or at least a coalition of the people that are bending to U.S. pressure to sign on at this point, Kevin.
Okay, Carl, thanks very much. Carl Hanlon in Washington. The number 40, of course, is a key number for the Bush administration, because Bush Sr. was able to put together a coalition of 37 countries in the first Gulf War, but it is worth underscoring that those were countries that actually contributed troops and material and were much more forthcoming in their support of the American action at the time to try to repel the Iraqi army from Kuwait. This time there are only 3 countries, the United States, Britain, and Australia, actually contributing troops. Canada very much on the sidelines here. I want to bring in David Viano, who is in our Ottawa bureau, and we just heard Carl report, David, that the Americans are on the phones trying to get other countries to expel Iraqi diplomats from their countries. That is a question, I think, that Stockwell Day actually raised in the House of Commons. Do we know?
He did.
Go ahead.
He did raise that in the House of Commons, and I believe the answer that came out is that because we're not engaged in hostilities with Iraq, there's no basis for us to make that request. That would appear to be what was said in the Commons.
Okay. I guess the scrums after question period have taken place on Parliament Hill. Anything new there?
Well, much more significant, I think, from there is that David Collinette, the Transport Minister, came out and said that while there is no evidence that Canada is a target of any terrorist threat, he did announce new security measures at all transportation points. So let's listen to what he had to say after question period.
Well, effective today, there will be heightened police presence at ports, airports, major rails stations. There will be greater checking of passengers at airports, on ferries to the U.S., greater checking of cargo, stowed baggage on planes. And as you know, there are heightened restrictions at the border.
And we should say that later today, the House of Commons will hold its first vote on the action in Iraq. And the motion before the Commons is that Canada not participate in any war against Iraq. The vote is scheduled for about 5:30. Now, our viewers will recall in England there was a similar vote, and Tony Blair had a number of defections from his party. So this time we'll see how the Prime Minister does. It's almost certain that every Liberal will vote with him. At issue will be whether or not the Bloc and the ADP will vote with the Liberals, but whether the Alliance and the Tories, how they will vote.
So help us understand, is this simply an expression of the Canadian Parliament? Does it have any legal weight, legal authority? What's its purpose?
It's just an expression of the Canadian Parliament, and I think the opposition parties, particularly the Alliance today, tried to trap the government saying, again raising the issue of chemical weapons, because France, which is also opposed to this war, has said if chemical weapons are used, that France will enter the war. And the Prime Minister again declined to answer that, saying that we will, not go there, it's hypothetical, and that's where he left it. Now, there was another pointed question from the NDP this time, Bill Blakey, saying, because our JTF forces did such an admirable job in Afghanistan and the Americans really paid praise to them when they came home, are they operating in Iraq? Because there had been rumors they were there, submerged, waiting for the war to start, and the Prime Minister gave an unequivocal no. So they are not there. And again, on the vessels that are patrolling the Persian Gulf from Canada, the NDP also asked, do they have any role? Are they engaged in any way in protecting ships? Anything in the last 24 hours? And again, there was an unequivocal no.
All right, David, thanks very much for that update. Appreciate that. So, David Collinette telling Canadians that increased security measures have now been put into place across this country, including the airports, including the ports. So if you are flying today, you can expect to spend a lot more time in the lineups going through X-ray machines and the like. Obviously, the worldwide terror alert that has been issued by the United States precipitating somewhat of a similar reaction from the Canadian government. But this point anyway, nothing more than that. No airplanes grounded or anything like that. It is fairly business as usual, but obviously everybody on a much higher level of alert. I want to bring in David Pugliese. He is a military reporter for CanWest News Services. And David, we haven't had a chance to talk yet, but you have had a chance to sort of take a look at what has been, at least for the last hour, a bit of a pause in what looked to be a fairly major campaign. We're hearing reports that something has happened in southern Iraq, that there have been military victories there. What's your read on what the strategy has been of the American military in these early hours?
Well, I think, Kevin, that one thing that struck me as interesting was that Saddam Hussein has been able to torch some of his oil wells, reportedly anyways, and the Americans did have a plan to try to seize those before he could get that done. So I thought that was interesting from that aspect, if that plan has gone off the rails, or if they're going to move special forces, paratroopers in to seize what's left of the other wells.
Now, what about, we've talked a lot about the American military, of course, because there are reporters that are embedded with them. We're getting a little bit more information, but we've also heard from our CanWest reporters in Kuwait that there have been several Scud attacks against that part of the country. Any sense, and I know that information is extraordinarily limited at this point, but any sense on what the Iraqi strategy is to try to defend the regime?
I think it's they're doing exactly what they did in the last war: fire the Scuds, try to create terror. I mean, these are, as your correspondent there pointed out, they're highly inaccurate, but it does create problems. People don't know if there's chemical weapons on board those rockets, so it's a problem.
So far, and we've been asking this question, the Kuwaiti authorities not being terribly forthcoming on that issue, and calls that we make to them are going unanswered. Did this surprise you, the way the Americans have sort of haltingly started this campaign?
Well, as we were all told before, the shock and awe was going to be the strategy. But as one defense analyst said to me last week, that may be that could have been some misinformation, because why would they give their plans away? They tried to take out Saddam Hussein. They tried that in the first Gulf War more than 200 times. They targeted command and control bunkers and such, and they weren't able to get him. Once they almost were able to take him out, but it made sense to take that shot. Unfortunately, or well, they didn't. They weren't able to.
Right,
do that.
right, and we are hearing as well that Iraqi radio is right now actually broadcasting the voice of Saddam Hussein. Whether that's a tape, whether that is his voice, is impossible to say.
Mm-hmm.
So we were hearing from the U.S. Pentagon at this point that this is not the so-called shock and awe campaign. You almost hate to borrow their language because it's somewhat clinical, but that this is not the large campaign. How much longer do you think that a military can wait between the time that it decides to tell somebody like Saddam Hussein, we're coming after you, to the point where it where it becomes necessary to actually do that kind of action?
I don't think there's a problem in that. The American presence is so large, their technology is so advanced that it's almost their time in choosing on when they can go. And I think you're going to see the Iraqis pulling back, torching the oil wells, and making their stand in Baghdad. That would make sense from Saddam Hussein's point of view.
Okay, David, thank you. I would invite you to continue to monitor the developments. It is still nighttime there, and as I think we are all familiar at this point, this is the time that the American military traditionally chooses to attack its targets because it has such superiority in nighttime battle. Want to go to another report from an NBC reporter, Paul Nasser. He is with the 3rd Infantry U.S. Division, which apparently has been a little bit more active today than the 101st Airborne we saw with Daniel Lewis a little bit earlier, but he is one of those reporters embedded with the U.S. military.
Yes, I am with the 3rd Infantry Division here in Kuwait, and the scene right now is one of eerie silence and quiet. The unit that I'm with has been ordered to get some rest, much needed rest, before any push northwards. And but this was a very different scene 3.5 hours ago, when the skies above us just lit up, and we heard round after round of howitzers and surface-to-surface missiles being fired from the region that we were in. In addition to that, 3.5 hours ago, we saw a series of cruise missiles making their shore but steady way northwards. And but since that time, things have quietened down, and the unit that I've been with, like I said, has been ordered to get some rest here in Kuwait.
And Paul, I understand you're under severe restrictions as to telling us where you are, but can you tell us, are you in Iraq now?
No, I am in Kuwait, but very close to the border.
These rockets and artillery barrages that were launched from the 3rd Infantry Division, was there any counter-fire from the Iraqi side?
There was none as far as we can tell. Earlier in the afternoon today, we heard a few thuds of surface-to-air or surface-to-surface missiles that were launched from our side, the U.S. troops. Immediately, about 5 to 10 minutes after that, there was a warning of a possible chemical attack, at which point all the units that I was with was ordered to go up from 0 to MOP 4, which is full protective chemical.
So, as you can hear from Paul Nasser from NBC News, obviously a very serious situation that he and the troops of the 3rd Infantry Division are facing. We will continue to monitor those reports from embedded reporters from not only the American news organizations, but we also have one of our own CanWest reporters, Matthew Fisher, who is embedded, I believe, even with that same unit. So we'll continue to see what he has to report from where he is. All right, we want to just sort of build on what we just heard from Canada's Transport Minister David Collinette a couple of moments ago, where he announced out of the House of Commons that security measures had been enhanced in Canada as well. We have standing by in Halifax Global National's Ross Lord. Ross, obviously the port's an area of concern about how porous they are for any potential terrorist reprisals. What can you tell us?
Well, Kevin, Halifax is not only home to two rather large container piers for shipping containers, it also has the bulk of Canada's Navy warships and ammunition, so there are greater fears here than in some parts of Canada. Today there were the first tangible signs of extra security. At the Navy dockyard entrances, you could see heavily armed soldiers carrying C-7 assault rifles, and they were making the rounds to make sure that everything was okay. Also, on the warships that are still docked here in Halifax Harbor on the Navy dockyard, you could see sailors conducting visual inspections over the side. And at the container pier, where police cars normally come and go at random, they are now stationed full-time at the port gates. And port officials are telling us they're working closely with their colleagues at the ports of Montreal and Vancouver to make sure that the measures are synchronized among the three ports and that they share any intelligence that may be gathered. It is worth noting that there's been no specific threat reported, but all the same, the words today are prudence and precaution.
All right, those are important things to note, and we want to thank you for those
Time for us to break away from our colleagues at the CanWest War Desk. We will continue to monitor the situation in Iraq this afternoon and work on security and other angles of the story, and we'll be back with CH News at 5. We'll rejoin live coverage as warranted.
Inside Iraq, I'm with the Marines' 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion. It's part of the 1st Marine Division, which comprises tens of thousands of fighting men and vehicles. We have just crossed the border into southern Iraq. We are the lead element of what will be a major push into Iraq from the southern end. This was supposed to happen, I should tell you, not until about 10 o'clock your time, 6 a.m. our time, but it all got pushed ahead. And this push across the border into southern Iraq, Dan, was followed by some pounding artillery barrages. Shells were falling at the rate of 1 second for 30 minutes at a time, and there were at least 3 of those before we pushed across the border. We had been staged about 10 kilometers south of the Kuwaiti side of the border, but just a few moments ago, Dan, the U.S. Marines pushed across the border into southern Iraq.
And of course, the great question now is how will those troops be received if, in fact, the British troops have been able to encircle Basra? The American troops, as John Roberts just reported, are on their way there. Are they being welcomed as invaders, which is entirely possible? This does it has all the makings, of course, of an invasion. Will they be viewed, though, as invaders by regular Iraqis, or will they be viewed as liberators, that they are here to rid their country of Saddam Hussein, a man who has proven himself time and again to be a tyrant? All right, let's bring in Tim Carter again, who has been doing some of our analysis and helping us understand this. I want to talk just briefly, Tim, about the importance of Basra. I gave a little bit of indication there, but Basra, if these reports from Gary Dimmick are correct, if they are able to encircle it, that would be an area that the Americans and the British would be keenly interested in.
That's right, Kevin. Basra is the key center in southern Iraq. As you noted, it's a city of about 1 million people. It also would allow the coalition to control the southern oil fields that surround it. And on top of that, it's the key Shiite center in southern Iraq. And as you may recall, the Shiites rose against Saddam Hussein following the 1991 Gulf War. And by controlling Basra and perhaps liberating it, I believe the United States hopes that they can further undermine Saddam's rule throughout the rest of the country.
Is it clear, Tim, and I don't know if you can help us with this or not, but is it clear that if the Americans and the British are able to sort of occupy Basra, is it clear that the Shiites would welcome that and would perhaps feel emboldened to pursue their own military gains, or is this something that the Shiites, given the experience of the last Gulf War, may say, hey, you know, you were supposed to be for us that last time, we may not necessarily trust you'll be for us this time?
I think that's an open question at this point. Certainly the Shiites' sort of experience in the last Gulf War left them incredibly bitter. Also, the Shiites' natural alliances with Iran, which obviously has a rather mixed relationship with the United States right now, or had a mixed relationship even before this war started, and obviously that relationship is now even more complicated. On the other hand, they will be very happy to be rid of Saddam Hussein, presumably, so it's not clear as yet which way they will go or whether they will elect to simply sit it out and wait and see what happens.
Now the Shiites, just by way of background, we should remind our viewers, have been very poorly treated by Saddam Hussein. They are the majority religion in Iraq. The Sunni Muslims, Saddam being a Sunni, is in the minority. I want to talk a little bit about the northern territories there, and just to help our viewers a little bit, the Shiites predominate in the south. There is a no-fly zone over that area to try to protect that population from Saddam Hussein. Now in the north are the Kurds, many of them more likely to be Sunnis. Give us a sense, we've heard some reports from Al Jazeera that there have been air raid sirens in Mosul in the north there, and that there may have been some sort of involvement with something called JDAM bombs. What are those?
JDAM bomb, as I believe was explained perhaps a little earlier on the show, is essentially a guidance package, an incredibly cheap guidance package that you strap to a conventional or dumb bomb, as you will, and can very easily and quickly turn it into a smart bomb. The United States will probably use JDAMs on virtually all of its air-launched munitions, except perhaps in conditions of extremely close support for ground troops. And what it means is that virtually every bomb they drop will be precision guided and can be expected to land pretty much on the targets they aim at.
Now the military action, I mean, if there are air raid sirens going off in Mosul, does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does, because the northern front is extremely important. It's important from a military perspective because the coalition will want to put stress on every element of the Iraqi army. It's perhaps even more important politically because of the sort of tangled web of political relationships there between the Kurds and the Turks and presumably American forces once they're on place in the ground there. So it makes perfect sense for the Americans to try and undermine the Iraqi command and control up there, and to begin to perhaps, if the troops don't look like they're going to surrender, to begin to bomb Iraqi troops in that area as well.
All right, Tim, thank you very much. Appreciate your help understanding some developments in the last half hour. Tim Carter in our national newsroom. I want to bring in Jim Hansen now, who is a military expert with CanWest News Services, and sort of build on this discussion that we're having here, Jim. I just want to talk about the northern areas. I mean, do you have a sense of how much the American and British plans rely on being able to conscript fighters either in the northern territories or the Shiites in the south? Because that was one thing that they tried to do in Afghanistan by trying to have the Northern Alliance do some of their fighting. Do you think they're counting on any of that this time?
I wouldn't think they'd count on it, simply because that's a best case scenario. And the military, of course, is trained to think in worst case scenario terms. I suspect that the Americans would have loved to have got the 4th Infantry Division into the northern area, simply because they were troops that were American. They would be a significant threat to Baghdad. The folks that are in the northern area right now are Kurds, very adept at fighting the Iraqis, because they've been doing it for years, but they're only equipped with light weapons, and they wouldn't be much of a threat to the Iraqis.
But do they need it politically? I mean, if one of the things that they're trying to do is to convince Iraqis that they're there to liberate them, if indeed the British and the American forces are on their way to Basra or have surrounded it at this point, what do they need, do you think, if they're able to control a section of Iraqi territory, to be able to send out a message and make it believable in Iraq that they're there not to occupy and control the country, but to liberate it?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I think the Kurdish areas in northern Iraq are already controlled by the Kurds, and they probably have American special forces operating there, and they've probably been operating there for quite some time. So it's important to make sure that the Kurds know that they're on side, that the Americans are their allies. But when it comes to the heavy lifting against the Iraqi military, it will be done by the Americans, and it's just unfortunate that there are no American mechanized or infantry divisions up there. There's only going to be probably light forces, unless they take in some of the 82nd Airborne or 101st Airborne. And it will be a fairly quiet front, hold the line on the part of the Kurds, and see what develops.
Do you think that northern front is pretty well done at this point? Because we've seen reports in the last couple hours from embedded reporters with the 101st Airborne. They clearly have not repositioned. They're still in Kuwait. We had the Turkish parliament today saying that there could be flyovers of the region, and also maybe, quite ominously, the Turkish troops would be moving toward the border. How do you read that situation?
Turks are very concerned about the Kurds. There's a very large Kurdish minority in Turkey, as there is, of course, in Iraq, and to a certain extent in Iran, and even to a certain extent in Syria. And the Kurds have been pushing for a homeland basically since 1919. They've been, in some cases, terrorists in Turkey, and the Turks are afraid that a large incursion of Kurds from Kurdish Iraq into Kurdish Turkey would just enhance their security problems the Turks have had for a long time. The new Turkish government may be a bit more amenable to working with the Kurds, but the last thing that the Turks need is more Kurds in Turkey. So there's a very good chance that the Turks would mass along the border simply to keep Kurdish refugees out, and if the Kurdish refugees started coming in, they may actually push across the border into Kurdistan itself, simply to stabilize the situation.
Now I want to ask you a strategic question now, if I can, and that goes to what we're seeing as a response to this from the Iraqi military. I mean, we've had, I think, 9 Scud attacks, or missile attacks anyway, we think they're Scuds, on Kuwait. No confirmation of any other reports of anything sort of going on against Jordan, against Israel, against the north. Do you think Saddam Hussein is laying low for now?
I think the hardest thing in the world to do is read Saddam Hussein's mind. Everybody says he thinks he's Stalin. I think he's acting more like Hitler, actually, and the real danger is that if he decides that his regime is doomed, he may decide to pull Iraq down around his ears, which means biological weapons, perhaps an attack on Israel if he could mount one with, say, some hidden Scuds, which would perhaps bring the Israelis into the war, which would alienate the rest of the world of Islam. Right. So there must be a major American diplomatic effort going on right now in Israel, for example, as there was in 1990, 1991, to keep the Israelis out, and also trying to read what Saddam Hussein will do when the Americans get a little closer to Baghdad. Just an intensely complicated situation, simply because of the personality of Saddam Hussein.
Well, you mentioned that. I mean, it seems like from these first attacks that the Americans are almost playing with his mind a little bit, trying to either hit his home, his family, his most senior. I mean, they seem to understand this about Saddam and are trying to play some mind games of their own, are they not?
Oh, indeed. And in fact, if you're a geostrategist, every nation has to have a war aim before it starts. The Americans' war aim has been very clear, a regime change in Iraq. Saddam's war aim, of course, is only in Saddam's mind, but it's pretty obvious from what he's been doing basically since 1991, is survive, and not only survive, but survive as the leader of Iraq. And I think some of the things the Americans have been doing with targeting senior Iraqi leadership is convincing them that they can reach out and touch them, and their best bet would be to depose Saddam Hussein themselves, and that way save their own skins.
All right, Jim, thanks very much. Interesting perspective. Appreciate it. Jim Henson standing by in our Victoria studios. A couple of other bits and pieces just want to bring you up to date on. Keeping our eye on Baghdad, as always. Still very quiet in the night sky. You can see there's even some equipment on the streets. Night scope video there. Not a lot going on. Hasn't been actually for the past couple of hours. We are hearing that all flights in and out of Kuwait are now canceled, all civilian flights. No surprise there. If you get 9 missiles lobbed at you, chances are you're not going to want to be taking commercial aircraft up. CNN also reporting from France that ricin has been found at the Paris rail station. Ricin, obviously a very toxic chemical. Not clear at this point what quantities or any other details on that, but that there has been some ricin found. And this, of course, one of the classic concerns of everybody in the Western world at this point, that the people will use this opportunity for whatever purposes and take advantage of it to continue a terror campaign. Let us go to Sean Mellon, who is in Global's Toronto studios now for this continuing discussion of what the Americans have accomplished to this date and how far the Americans and the British have to go. Sean?
Yes, Kevin, and then just to reiterate, the reports we have so far is that they have taken the city of Qasr, which is the southern port city just across the border from Kuwait, and that they have surrounded Basra. And our guests, John Thompson and Brian McDonald, are going to help us with this. We've got our map up there now, Brian. Perhaps you can give us an idea of where this initial thrust went through.
Well, it appears that, in fact, the lead troops have been the 1st UK Armoured Division, which has 2 brigades, an air assault brigade, and the 7th Armoured Brigade, which is the Desert Rats. It appears that the 7th Armoured Brigade went in and captured the area to the south of Basra. I see we flipped on the different map.
Okay, we can discuss this map. This is the.
This one gives us a sense of the overall deployment of the Iraqis with the regular forces in the south, and these are expected to be the ones that are the most demoralized. And from the looks of it, the British, in fact, are the ones who have struck first and hard, and have got a position surrounding Basra, plus then the port at the mouth of the Fa Peninsula. And if this is the case, then the Brits have moved very quickly indeed. And then there will be a link-up force coming in to finish it off, which would be the 3rd Mechanized Division, perhaps, and the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, which has the Marine 1st Division plus its aviation resources and its support resources on top of that.
And John, we're looking at this graphic here. We just had it up for a second there, the idea of where the Special Republican Guard and the Republican Guard are within the country. But these initial thrusts, Qasr, surrounding Basra, this is what we expected, I take it.
Yeah, and the Marines are halfway up to Basra already. Basra has been flanked in the north. There's no retreat from it. The 3rd Mechanized Division is somewhere out and will no doubt be heard from very quickly. This is all part of the overall plan for moving so quickly and so ferociously that you just demoralize the enemy. And you add on top of that all the psychological elements, the emails and telephone calls to the generals, the leaflet drops. These are the Iraqi troops here are not going to know what's hitting them. But many of them are also veterans of 1991, and they remember that fighting against Western equipment is tantamount to suicide. Their artillery has already been hit by the American MLRS rockets, which basically, if you're standing on an artillery battery and these rockets come in, the whole battery is dead and all of its equipment is destroyed in a couple of seconds.
Now, I wanted to ask both of you about, we also had a report, I think it was from Iraqi radio, the Iraqis claiming to have repulsed an assault from Jordan. Do you put much credence in that?
You sure?
There have been reports of special forces operating out of Jordan into western Iraq for quite some time. In fact, some figures have suggested as many as 4,000 people in the area supporting those operations. So it's entirely consistent with that sort of a report that there may have been a little small firefight between some special forces folks and some Iraqis in place, which then is reported by the Iraqis as being a victory, and that the fact that the special forces, having seen where they were, marked down their coordinates to be sent upstairs to the next JDAM in sight, have moved on to pick up the next target.
And so that, John, you think is the principal reason for these skirmishes, to identify them as targets for?
Also psychological operations, perhaps for deception, and to look for missiles, in case there are still Scud missiles, which do have the range to hit Israel from the westernmost tip of Iraq.
Now, just put some of the numbers in context here, because although the Americans greatly outgun the Iraqis actually technically outnumber the Americans. We've got a board to indicate the number of forces here for the Iraqis.
Well, you have to remember, in 1991, there were 100 coalition battlefield deaths in the 4 days of fighting, 10,000 Iraqi ones.
Let's address this one, though. John, you can see 285,000 regular army alone. That's almost the entire force of the, more than the Americans, and almost as much as the Americans and Brits combined. But I take it you don't take that number too seriously. It's the following two numbers, Republican Guard and Special Republican Guard, Brian?
Are the more serious ones, because the regular army at this point is demoralized, as John has said. This equipment is old, the technology has not improved, whereas the American technology has gone a couple of generations farther. So the expectation has been that the regular army will fold quickly. There are in fact even rumors floating around that two divisional commanders in the south have been negotiating with the Americans with the intent of then simply capitulating and surrendering the entirety of their divisions. Now, I don't know whether this is true or not, but I am intrigued by the speed of the British advance.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll be back to you later. And let's go back to Kevin in Vancouver.
All right, Sean, thanks very much. Top of the clock, we are watching a couple of developments. That is the time when the Turkish airspace will open. The Turkish Parliament taking a vote a few hours ago and deciding that they would allow U.S. and British fighter jets to fly over Turkish territory. That will be a significant strategic advantage to the Americans and the British as well. And at the top of the clock, we are also anticipating, although this time is fluid, an address by British Prime Minister Tony Blair to the people of Great Britain about what has been going on the past few hours. All right, we are going to connect now with Gary Dimmick, who, as we reported a few moments ago, got some interesting information about what is going on in and around Basra. Gary is stationed for CanWest News Services in Doha, Qatar, and that is very close to the military base where U.S. and British Central Command is located. Gary, what can you tell us?
Well, Kevin, good evening. A British military source here has disclosed that some 10,000 troops of the UK's armoured division, fighting alongside the Marines, of course, is expected to make key approaches. They're expecting actually overnight to the ancient port city of Basra. This, of course, will be done once what is being called an intense artillery exchange is complete. And they'll be using amphibious vehicles and choppers supported by Apaches. And every indication right now from here at Central Command is that these troops will not deploy its parachute companies because they're expecting a demoralized enemy, and in turn hostility is expected to be quite low.
You hear that?
Okay, sorry, Gary. So from what I understand then is that because the last report we heard was that they were outside of the city, but they're fairly confident at this point that they're going to be able to move from outside Basra and actually move into it?
What the military source said here is that they're expected to make key approaches overnight to the ancient port city of Basra. That's what they're expecting here.
All right, and the British troops seem to be in the lead. Is there much information flowing from Central Command there? Are they having any military briefings whatsoever?
On the American side, the answer would be no.
And but the British are providing some information?
The British have been pretty good about giving daily back briefings.
All right, we're looking at some file photos now of the command structure there, and obviously these are older pictures. But so the British are providing some sort of background briefing. But are we hearing anything on any activity anywhere else? Anything? We've been hearing reports from Iraqi television of something going on in Jordan or whatsoever, or is it mostly just what the British are providing about Basra?
The British are basically dealing with exclusively what they're doing, and their key approach right now is toward Basra, from what I'm told tonight. From the American side, Tommy Franks or any of his underlings have not commented on anything so far here.
Now that strikes me as a little bit odd. I remember in the Afghan War and several others, after 2 days of a campaign, that there was, you know, from somewhere in the U.S. administration, some sort of comment. But as far as you can tell, there is no move toward that imminent from the U.S.
Not here, Kevin. Not tonight. No. The first daily briefing that we could possibly see from General Tommy Franks would be tomorrow, not today.
Okay, Gary, thank you very much. Appreciate you updating us on that, and I guess we will watch the developments in and around Basra overnight. Gary Dimmick from the CanWest News Services providing the information from U.S. Central Command, what little information the U.S. Central Command is supplying at this point. A couple of other points I want to bring you up to speed on, and our stations in the Maritimes will be breaking away at the top of the clock to provide your local global news, and in the rest of the country we will continue because we are standing by, we believe, for comments from Tony Blair and others. So now confirmation from several sources. You saw John Roberts a little while ago from an embedded report that in fact the U.S. Army has crossed over, that it is now in southern Iraq, and we are having that confirmed by several reporters and several different units that are traveling with the U.S. military. No immediate details on the size and makeup of the entering force or the location, but what they are being permitted to say is that they have crossed the border now. They are in southern Iraq. We are also standing by for some more information on that ricin incident. We have a little bit more on that. We told you a little bit earlier that authorities had found inside a locker at a railway station in Paris. This is according to the French Interior Ministry. 2 vials of the potentially deadly material found at Gare de Lyon railway station. That is one of 2 or 3 central railway stations in and around Paris. A lot of people move through those stations, not only the TGV to move into the countryside of France, but also the subway and the internal transportation within Paris. So a very key location there. Ricin, about 6,000 times more powerful than cyanide rather, and it is the same kind of thing that was found by British authorities in London in January. So that is the latest information. They have located that. All right, our stations in the Maritimes about to cut away, and for the rest of the country, our coverage on Global continues as the campaign continues in the Middle East. Back in a second. Okay, Global News' coverage continuing in the rest of the country, the Maritimes. Tony Blair.
Roll queue is northern Kuwait.
Are not known. Continuing coverage of strike on Iraq, Wolf Blitzer reports, starts right now.
Remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction. I know this course of action has produced deep divisions of opinion in our country. But I know also the British people will now be united in sending our armed forces our thoughts and prayers. They are the finest in the world, and their families and all of Britain can have great pride in them. The threat to Britain today is not that of my father's generation. War between the big powers is unlikely. Europe is at peace. The Cold War already a memory. But this new world faces a new threat of disorder and chaos, born either of brutal states like Iraq, armed with weapons of mass destruction, or of extreme terrorist groups. Both hate our way of life, our freedom, our democracy. My fear, deeply held, based in part on the intelligence that I see, is that these threats come together and deliver catastrophe to our country and our world. These tyrannical states do not care for the sanctity of human life. The terrorists delight in destroying it. Some say if we act, we become a target. The truth is, all nations are targets. Bali was never in the front line of action against terrorism. America didn't attack Al-Qaeda. They attacked America. Britain has never been a nation to hide at the back. But even if we were, it wouldn't avail us. Should terrorists obtain these weapons, now being manufactured and traded around the world, the carnage they could inflict to our economies, our security, to world peace would be beyond our most vivid imagination. My judgment as Prime Minister is that this threat is real, growing, and of an entirely different nature to any conventional threat to our security that Britain has faced before. For 12 years, the world tried to disarm Saddam after his wars in which hundreds of thousands died. UN weapons inspectors say vast amounts of chemical and biological poisons such as anthrax, VX nerve agent and mustard gas remain unaccounted for in Iraq. So our choice is clear. Back down and leave Saddam hugely strengthened, or proceed to disarm him by force. Retreat might give us a moment of respite, but years of repentance at our weakness would, I believe, follow. It is true Saddam is not the only threat, but it is true also, as we British know, that the best way to deal with future threats peacefully is to deal with present threats with resolve. Removing Saddam will be a blessing to the Iraqi people. 4 million Iraqis are in exile, 60% of the population dependent on food aid, thousands of children die every year through malnutrition and disease, hundreds of thousands have been driven from their homes or murdered. I hope the Iraqi people hear this message. We are with you. Our enemy is not you, but your barbarous rulers. Our commitment to the post-Saddam humanitarian effort will be total. We shall help Iraq move towards democracy and put the money from Iraqi oil in a UN trust fund so that it benefits Iraq and no one else. Neither should Iraq be our only concern. President Bush and I have committed ourselves to peace in the Middle East based on a secure state of Israel and a viable Palestinian state. We will strive to see it done. But these challenges and others that confront us, poverty, the environment, the ravages of disease, require a world of order and stability. Dictators like Saddam, terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, threaten the very existence of such a world. That is why I've asked our troops to go into action tonight. As so often before, on the courage and determination of British men and women serving our country, the fate of many nations rests. Thank you.
A live transmission from London of British Prime Minister Tony Blair addressing his country. He took a little bit longer to do that. President Bush addressed Americans last night. Tony Blair taking another day because it appears that largely it is British troops were just engaged as of today. They were not part of last night's operation. But you heard the British Prime Minister there, who is in an enormously difficult political situation, touching on a couple of important points that he has been roundly criticized for and for supporting the Americans on. The key one, and we have heard this from him before, although it is worth pointing out we have not heard a similar promise from U.S. President George Bush, that oil that is from Iraq will be put in a United Nations trust fund, that he wants to make sure that the Iraqis and the Arab world understands that the British and the Americans do not want to take over the oil fields, that they will put all that revenue in a UN trust fund that will be redistributed. And the second, of course, important thing to the Arab world is his pledge to work toward a Palestinian state and to make sure that that occurs as well. So we're going to throw to CNN, I guess, where things are underway there. Let's listen in.
Other side of the border. Now, it's not described as a large action, but it is described as hostile contact. And an Army source told CNN that a number of vehicles of the Iraqi Army were taken out. The numbers I can't be precise upon, but there were apparently some Iraqi Iraqi trucks and perhaps some Iraqi tanks and Iraqi BMPs, that is, armored personnel carriers. The first hostile contact the Army has had has been by its scouting unit, the 7th Cavalry. That has slowed the progress somewhat here, but the push through is continued in a short while. Actually, the Army accelerated its timetable to move towards Iraq, accelerated it because the Iraqis fired at least half a dozen tactical ballistic missiles in the direction of U.S. troops in Kuwait earlier in the day. That being the case, the Army began moving forward a number of hours ago. That progress has moved somewhat, has been slowed somewhat, however, because of the first hostile contact the 7th Cavalry has had with Iraqi forces on the other side. Wolf?
Walter, earlier in the day we saw U.S. troops with you dressed in full battle gear, not only battle gear, but chemical and biological protective gear as well. Are they still dressed along those lines?
Wolf, I'm standing here wearing the Army's CBW suit, Chemical Biological Warfare suit. When these soldiers were ordered into their Bradley fighting vehicles this evening and into their tanks and in every other vehicle which is traveling with this unit, we were told to go to MOP 1, which is to say, put on your chemical weapons suits. We've done that. We do not need to wear our gas masks at this point. That MOP alert could be upgraded at any point, but every soldier here is at this point wearing his chemical weapons suit. Additionally, those in the armored vehicles are wearing what are called NOMACs. Those are fire retardant uniforms that the tankers and the men in the other fighting vehicles wear in case the vehicle is hit. The soldiers call those things their fireproof pajamas. Wolf?
Walter Rogers, he's here in Kuwait along the border with Iraq. You saw a video phone picture of him. It's after 1 a.m. here in this part of the world, not very far away from Walter, is Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN's medical correspondent.
All right, let's just stick with CNN for a second, because I think they're going to one of their reporters who's actually in a bunker there. Let's listen in for one more second.
Yeah, well, just past 1 o'clock in the morning here in the northern desert of Kuwait, sort of bright moon out here as well. Behind me is a bunker, and this is where most of the Marines here at Camp Iwo Jima have spent most of their day. Of course, that's not the kind of day that they were expecting. It started off like any other day for the Marines at Camp Iwo Jima. Many were glued to the television, hearing for the first time of the attacks in Baghdad. At 10:28 a.m. local time, everything changed. An object traveling very fast, about 300 feet above the ground, made the unmistakable sound of a missile. It caused Marines to scurry for cover. Another familiar sound was then heard. Bunker, bunker, bunker. Gas, gas, gas. This time, it was for real. This was no drill. Marines quickly grabbed their Kevlar helmets and gas masks and sprinted toward the nearest bunker. Packed tight, shoulder to shoulder, it was hot and hard to breathe.
This is the fourth bunker call in as many hours. As you can see, we're wearing our masks, our Kevlar, and our helmets. That's because we were instructed to do so, as we were instructed also to be here in this bunker. We have seen missiles flying overhead. We have heard thuds all around us. We have heard sirens as well. Who knows what's next?
It is fair to say everyone is anxious, tired, frustrated, but remain confident. For now, I'm writing this piece by flashlight, and our team is setting up in the dark, as close to the bunker as we can. Yeah, and another thing, Wolf, even since that time, there has been another bunker call. We've heard the sirens go off continuously. There are trucks set up right around the perimeter of the base here. There are trucks to basically continuously monitor the air. If they detect even the slightest abnormality, then everyone, basically these alarms go off. Wolf, even as we're doing this live shot, they have just shouted bunker, bunker, bunker. Marines are starting to come to this bunker. You'll see them here in just a few seconds. They're going to have their helmets on. They're going to have their Kevlar. This is the 10th bunker call, really, since 10 o'clock this morning. Wolf?
Well, what about the earlier fears, Sanjay, of chemical or biological agents in the air over where you are, resulting in you guys putting on those gas masks? Were those false alarms?
It appears at this time that they were false alarms. Again, these particular trucks that monitor the air are designed to be very sensitive, and a lot of different things that they can trigger them besides chemical themselves. Even particulate matter in the air from the dust, from the silicon, things like that can possibly trigger them. They're designed to be very sensitive, perhaps not as specific, but they have been going off continuously, Wolf. Like I said, we're just hearing it right now as well. There's a siren.
Well, it's funny you say you're hearing it.
That is a siren basically talking about the specific chemical thing. Who knows if it's a false alarm? Who knows if it's a real thing? You can hear the sirens, the horns going off. No, Wolf, we're going to go put our stuff on as well and jump into that bunker. Wolf?
All right, Sanjay, we're hearing sirens here in Kuwait City as well, presumably precaution because of where you are. This is the 6th time today here in Kuwait City. The sirens that you might be hearing behind me are going off. We're going to continue to monitor precisely what's happening here in Kuwait City. But as I speak to you right now, sirens for the 6th time today going off in Kuwait City. We'll continue to check out, see what the issue is here in Kuwait City. We'll follow up with Dr. Sanjay Gupta in northern Kuwait as well. In the meantime, let's go over to our senior Pentagon correspondent, Jamie McIntyre. Jamie, tell us what the latest assessment is at the Pentagon about the military.
All right, so you can see yet again in Kuwait City for the 6th time today, air raid sirens are being heard throughout Kuwait, and you were watching live, and this is one of the technological innovations of this war for television, is that we can broadcast, and we can show you the broadcast from our broadcasting colleagues like CNN, live from a bunker, from where the Army is moving. This, ladies and gentlemen, has never before been possible in a wartime situation, but technology has brought us to the point, and it is mobile enough, and we are able to broadcast. You got to look at it there with what Dr. Gupta was showing us there, just how small the units are. They can now broadcast from the middle of a military zone. As recently as 1991, you had to rent a truck to carry all the equipment with you to enable you to broadcast live from the front. Now it fits into a suitcase, and you can watch from the comfort of your living room here in Canada as our correspondents, the soldiers and the civilians and the people of Kuwait wait and see what those sirens meant. We are noticing that some of the other correspondents have once again donned their gas masks. That is just standard procedure in and around. The alert is only, as we are told at this point, in Kuwait City and also around, but that once again, for the 6th time in the past 6 hours, the people in that region are being told to don their gas masks and to prepare for some other attack. Obviously, we have not had any confirmation that there is anything, that there are no chemical or biological weapons that have been aimed from Iraq toward Kuwait. But it is very clear that the American military is taking that threat very seriously. We have heard that 10 times now, just in the past 6 hours, all the soldiers have been told to put on their gas masks, that they are currently wearing their biochemical suits. So there is clearly a concern here that Saddam Hussein has these weapons of mass destruction and is willing to use them, and they are taking every possible precaution with their troops to ensure that that does not happen. We are hearing from CNN now that the so-called shock and awe campaign, the big push that we had been anticipating would begin today, has been put on hold by the Pentagon. Again, they tend to want to proceed at night. It is now 1:15 in Iraq, and so the big push seems to have been put on hold, but we are getting no more information than that, no military briefings to explain why that would be. But if we are to get more from the American military, at least, it appears that is not going to be coming anytime soon. So as we continue to monitor the situation in Kuwait and see whether or not there's yet another missile attack on that part of the world, let us come back home for a minute and take a look at what has been happening in Canada the past 6 hours. We have been seeing street demonstrations spontaneously break out in many Canadian cities. These are pictures from, first of all, Halifax, of people who are opposed to what is going on over there. Marching down, I'm trying to figure out what street that is, and I can't all too well, but it is right downtown Halifax, that much I do know. And we have seen these pictures in other Canadian cities as well. A demonstration in Montreal down, looks to be Sherbrooke Street there. Not too many people, as you can see, a couple of dozen there, but everybody who has opposed this war from the outset, wanting Canadians to understand that that opposition continues even though the war is underway. In Calgary as well, we were talking to Leanne Niblock a little bit earlier. This was a fairly large demonstration that kicked off in and around downtown Calgary a little while ago, and as you can see, it continues to build as well. And there was a further one right in the heart of the city of Toronto that we got a look at from our Global News helicopter overhead. This is Bloor Street in downtown Toronto. Demonstrators moving toward Yonge Street. We heard from Scott Arnold that this protest was growing as it moved through the streets of Toronto. And we anticipate that we will be hearing more on that. The stations in Ontario and Quebec will be cutting away within this hour to update you on how these protests have been going in their cities and what has been happening across the country as far as Canadians wanting to get out and wanting to say this is not something that we support and we think this is wrong. Just want to check in quickly with Tara Nelson, who was at a demonstration in Vancouver. As we hear, the air raid sirens are continuing in Kuwait City. No indication yet as I look at the video on the other side. But Tara, you were at a demonstration that wrapped up pretty quickly. Now, most of the country assumes that the anti-war feeling would be fairly strong in and around Vancouver and British Columbia. It has perhaps more than most places a history of socialist and activist governments. You've lived here longer than I have. Give me a sense. Does it surprise you how mild and the protests have been in Vancouver?
Well, the funny thing is, it seems to be a very fluid protest that's happening today. I can hear the protesters, so that means they're not more than a block away. But there are very few of them behind me now. They're working their way around the city core and trying to make their presence seen. And they've been doing that for about the last 5 days. This protest site behind me here is right across the street from the American consulate. In Vancouver, it's just an office tower. It's a couple of floors in an office tower, but they wanted to make their presence outside the consulate well known. So they have been camped out here since last Friday. Today, the bulk of the protesters appear to be students, and they have been rotating through various causes, coming down to lend support. Today, this morning, actually, we saw more South Koreans in the crowd that had come down to lend support. But right over the noon hour in Vancouver, BC time, we saw a lot of students from 2 local colleges, and many of them it seemed to be relevant to them because they were saying, we're 18, we're 19 years old, and we know that a lot of the soldiers that are over in Iraq right now are only 18 or 19 years old, and they felt that this war shouldn't be happening, and they were very concerned not only for the soldiers, the young soldiers who were over there, but also for the Iraqis. Iraq, of course, has 23 million people as a population, and a couple of protesters told us, we're concerned about the 23 million innocent people that they feel are in Iraq, as opposed to perhaps the dozen or so people that they weren't necessarily opposed to being removed, but at what cost?
All right, Tara, thanks very much. Tara Nelson reporting from where the protests continue to go on in downtown Vancouver. Continuing to monitor the situation in Kuwait, CNN is reporting an interesting bit of information, and this may be significant, so listen up, that the Pentagon has put the operation on hold, the so-called shock and awe operation on hold, because it has reason to believe that the Iraqi leadership is in question. That is obviously code, but what they are saying is that they have reason to believe that the Iraqi leadership structure may be in question, perhaps that Saddam Hussein may not have full control or may not be where they think he is. So they have decided to hold back the campaign, the Pentagon says, until they can ascertain what the situation is politically in Iraq. Of course, this would be an enormous development and a very quick one if the Americans were able to claim that the leadership structure was breaking down in Baghdad, but they cannot claim that yet. What they want to do is they want to spend more time over the next few hours trying to determine what the situation is in Baghdad with the Iraqi leadership. And it seems that they're going to hold off any more attacks on Baghdad and until they have sufficient understanding of what that situation is. So that is a significant development. Let's go to Marina Jimenez, who is at the CanWest War Desk, and of course the War Desk is where they've been in touch with our correspondents. Marina, what do you have to report?
Well, Kevin, actually, interestingly, on the topic of the aerial assault, the fact that it's being put off, many analysts that I was speaking to today believe that the decision to go instead with what they're calling a decapitation strike is sort of a high-risk, low-probability tactic, and that it has a high probability of actually failing. And they mentioned the attempt in 1986 to bomb Gaddafi's personal command center. So while it would avoid a war, a protracted war, it's also going to be a difficult maneuver to achieve.
Yeah, quite obviously, but you know, it's hard to know because as journalists we're sort of stuck in the position of relaying what people are saying, and at this point these are all sources and whatever. The Pentagon's not having any briefings, so they can be open to some reporters questioning, but clearly the Americans taking it seriously if they believe that the leadership is in question. We have not heard any activity over Baghdad for some time, so this could be an interesting development to say the least.
Absolutely, and that's part of the problem is nobody actually knows what is going on in forming their military strategy. So this latest development could well, you know, make the initial plan for the decapitation strike work.
All right, thank you very much. Marina Jimenez from the CanWest War Desk with some interesting perspective on that. We are continuing to watch Kuwait City, the air raid sirens continuing there, gas masks on the correspondence. While we do, let's bring in Troy Reeb in Washington. Troy, you've been watching some of the protests across America today.
That's absolutely right, and picking up on what Marina Jimenez said about the Pentagon, is hoping that it does have some of the Iraqi leadership, if not knocked out, at least cut off from command and control of its forces. In other words, the communication lines have been knocked down. Communication, of course, is so very, very important on both sides of this conflict. The Americans trying to get their message out and appear to be that they have the upper hand. The Iraqis trying to project the image that they still are in control in their own country. It all adds up sometimes to a real fog of war.
Yeah.
In the streets of Washington, anti-war protesters clash with police. While these images are hardly representative of the American majority, they may be the only types of images Iraqis see from the United States. Tightly controlled state television certainly won't be broadcasting these comments.
The Iraqi soldiers and officers must ask themselves whether they want to die fighting for a doomed regime, or do they want to survive, help the Iraqi people in the liberation of their country.
But information from the other side is also being manipulated, with American officials trying hard to convince the world opinion is on their side.
Over 40 nations now support our efforts. We're grateful for their determination. We appreciate their vision, and we welcome their support.
The truth really is that in real military terms, in terms that matter, this is a coalition of 3 countries. The United States being the dominant country in the coalition, the United Kingdom providing some support, and then Australia providing even smaller support. Beyond that, the rest of it is literally on paper.
And while U.S. officials spread their version of the truth, they're also trying hard to get to the truth about this video.
Obviously, there are 2 issues in play. Is it Saddam Hussein or not? We've reached no conclusions. Was it pre-taped, pre-canned? We've reached no conclusions.
While intelligence experts now believe the tape is authentic, they also say in the end it probably didn't matter. The fact it was broadcast shows Saddam's power structure is still in control. But for how long remains to be seen. The Iranian news agency reported Saddam's eldest son, Uday, suffered a brain hemorrhage in a fight with one of his father's bodyguards. Though that report may well have been the product of American propaganda radio broadcasts. Not that the U.S. military is making any apologies for disinformation. Far from it.
There is no excuse for anyone revealing sensitive information that will almost certainly put the lives of men and women in uniform at risk.
So as much as the Donald Rumsfeld and the rest of the U.S. military structure is trying to tightly control those channels of information, word is now coming out of the Pentagon that some operations may in fact be soon on hold because they are trying to ascertain just how in control of the Iraqi military and indeed the country Saddam Hussein is. Kevin?
All right, Troy, one other question before we let you go. You've been making some phone calls checking into this terror alert that was issued by the FBI and possible Canadian passport connection. Just update us on that if you don't mind.
Yeah, we've been following that very closely. In fact, relatively unrelated to the Iraqi operation, though. As much as there is a major operation going on militarily in Kuwait and in southern Iraq, there's also a major operation going on here in the United States by the FBI. They have mobilized thousands of agents to start questioning Iraqi immigrants to this country for any knowledge they may have of terrorist links. And at the same time, they have issued this worldwide alert that you refer to for a man who apparently has some kind of Canadian connection. His name is Adnan al-Shukr Juma. That is his name, but there are many other names he goes by, and most disturbing to the FBI is one of his nicknames, which is Jafar al-Tayr, which means Jafar the Pilot. The fear in the FBI is that this man may in fact be a al-Qaeda ringleader. They don't know where he is in the United States. They believe he was last seen in Miami, and we are receiving word late today that the FBI did mount a raid of a residence in Miami looking for any information on this man's whereabouts. The Canadian connection to all this is that he is carrying, according to the FBI, at least 4 passports. One from Saudi Arabia, the country he was born in, one from Guyana in South America, one from Trinidad, and one, oddly enough, from Canada. The FBI did get some new authority today to start rounding up people on immigration warrants. This is sort of a wartime authority they have now that the United States is at war. This authority was conferred on the Federal Bureau of Investigation by the Attorney General John Ashcroft. They can start arresting people on immigration charges if they are believed to pose some kind of wartime threat. No word yet whether any of such arrests have been made, but the FBI does have broad new powers today, and they're using them to try to look for this al-Shukr Juma, who is believed to have this Canadian passport connection. Kevin.
All right, Troy, thanks very much. Some of the details on that case that we will continue to follow. We just want to advise our viewers and our stations that because of the developments, the American military has decided to be in a pause situation, that we are going to bow out of our national coverage in approximately 2 minutes. We will continue, of course, to monitor developments, and if something should change, we will come back on the full global network. But at this point, we are going to say goodbye for a little while. Coming up in Ontario, you will see the local global news, and at 6 o'clock in Quebec, you will also see the local global news. And then, of course, immediately following that, right across the country, we are preparing a special edition of Global National as well. So let's take one last look in the 2 hot zones that we have established today, beginning with Baghdad, where for the last 2 hours it has been relatively quiet. There was some anti-aircraft tracer fire maybe 2 hours ago, but that was the last that we have heard. What we are hearing from Troy and from others at the Pentagon, that there is a lid on military activity while the Americans try to figure out what the command structure currently is in Baghdad. Obviously, they have some information that is that they're confident is accurate enough that they have put a pause on their campaign in this part of Iraq. Let's go to Kuwait City, where the air raid sirens has seemed to have stopped at this point. That was the 6th time Kuwait City has heard those today. There have been 9 Scud missile attacks, it is believed, from Iraq. No word on whether or not they were simply conventional weapons or anything more than that. And we are still standing by there. We'll have an update on Global National from Wilf Dinnick in Kuwait City as well. But the headline has been that the U.S. military has moved into southern Iraq in the past few hours. They have occupied an area of southern Iraq on their way to Basra. We will be back if events warrant. We'll see you for Global National at your supper hour. But for now, from the National News Center, this is Kevin Newman.
This has been breaking news from the Global National Newsroom.
So the established world security system presents even a bigger concern.
Anti-war demonstrators in Egypt led to violent confrontations between protesters and riot police. There have been similar protests around the world, and regrets from the UN Secretary General.
Perhaps if we had persevered a little longer, Iraq could yet have been disarmed peacefully, or if not, the world could have taken action to solve this problem by a collective decision.
In Spain, there are predictions the war against Saddam Hussein will restore international law.
Are supporting a mission on a humanitarian basis. And this is a very important mission, and I would like to express to all the people doing it they have my support and my trust.
Not surprisingly, the strongest support comes from Australia and Great Britain, the 2 countries joining the U.S. in sending troops into battle.
We are determined to join other countries to deprive Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction its chemical and biological weapons, which even in minute quantities are capable of causing death and destruction on a mammoth scale.
I've asked our troops to go into action tonight. As so often before, on the courage and determination of British men and women serving our country, the fate of many nations rests.
Now, the Vatican blames both sides for failing to avoid war in Iraq. Allison, the Vatican says its embassy in Baghdad will remain open and that Catholic organizations in Iraq will continue providing humanitarian assistance.
All right, Randy, we'll look for your update on today's events later in the broadcast. Thank you. Between the war with Iraq and all the protests that follow,
security in Chicago remains a major concern.
There's a price to pay for our freedom, and that's it.
That story and more as our coverage of the war with Iraq continues.
Rachel, take it.
And here on our own soil, it's evident this nation is at war. City skyscrapers, the Chicago River, all of it under the watchful eye of law enforcement. It seems Chicago police have become our local foot soldiers, keeping an eye out for trouble.
WGN's Julie Unruh joins us from the newsroom with more on Chicago's increased security. Julie.
Good evening. While Chicago is still waiting for more federal money to help pay for the extra protection measures, Chicago officials aren't waiting. Reinforcements have already hit the streets. Buildings like these make Chicago one of the prettiest cities in the land. But when times are troubled overseas, their beauty and function can't go unprotected. Today, law enforcement was out in droves, circling the John Hancock, combing the Chicago River, and simply walking the streets. At the Sears Tower, more frequent patrols outside the building gave some workers inside comfort and courage.
You think about it because you hear it on TV and the radio, but then when you get here, it's a whole different type of atmosphere.
For tourists, the police and the barricades are a good sign the U.S. is on its toes.
It's kind of nice to see that they're thinking of us, to take care of us a little more, that they're kind of watching for everybody's safety.
But in today's New York Times, one report says Khalid Sheikh Mohammed revealed Chicago was part of the hijackers' plan on September 11th. In a statement, the alleged architect of the attacks said that fateful day was supposed to include multiple targets across the country. Quote, the document said it included the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, the United States Capitol, the White House, the Israeli Embassy in Washington, and the Sears Tower in Chicago. The head of Chicago's emergency preparedness refutes any such report, saying Chicago was unaware of any intelligence back then. As far as security, some say there is still more work to do. In recent days, city and state officials have spoken out in favor of a restricted airspace above the city. The FAA tells WGN that request is now in the hands of Homeland Security. At the airports, IDs are heavily scrutinized. Cars are randomly inspected. Getting somewhere, doing the mundane, takes a whole lot more time, but trouble for many, that's worth it.
Well, it is sad that that's what it's come to, but really there's a price to pay for our own freedom, and that is it, and that's the way it is.
Now, because of war efforts in the Persian Gulf, Chicago's Emergency Command Center is now operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Stephen Allison, regarding that proposed no-fly zone over the city of Chicago, the FAA tells us there is no saying when that request will be either granted or denied.
All right, Julie Unruh, we thank you for that report. And our coverage of the war with Iraq continues.
Remember this? These are the oil fields of Kuwait 12 years ago, after Saddam Hussein's retreating army set them afire in the first Gulf War. Walls of fire everywhere, and mountains of smoke that reached to the heavens, turning the hot desert sun into a pale moon. The delicate desert environment was devastated, and freak rainstorms lashed the sands. Clouds of polluting smoke drifted thousands of kilometers. Even this close to the fire is cold here in the desert. I was there, and the cold in the normally hot desert surprised me. Here we were, close to fires hotter than 1,000 degrees, and yet a few steps beyond them, we bundled up as the flames sucked up air and warmth. More than 600 wells were on fire, and it took firefighters from 8 nations, Canadians included, 6 months to put them out. Altogether, it took 2 years and $50 billion to get production back to pre-war levels. Now we have another Gulf War, and right in its first day, the Americans reported that the Iraqis set several oil wells just north of the Kuwaiti border on fire. And many people expect Saddam Hussein to set hundreds, maybe all of Iraq's 1,600 oil wells alight.
Well, one of the things that I remember the most vivid about being in Kuwait was the whole country being on fire.
Mark Barrick is one of the Canadians who fought those Kuwait fires. He and others from his company, safety boss of Red Deer, Alberta, put out 180 fires then. This time around, he says, it could be worse. For one thing, because of a gas, hydrogen sulfate, or H2S.
In Kuwait, we didn't have to deal with H2S at all. They were sweet, so we didn't have to work underneath breathing apparatus. In any time that you're dealing with a sour well in Iraq or anywhere in the world, what you have to do is you have to constantly have a breathing air supply to yourself so that you can work within the cloud of H2S.
That could make fighting fires in Iraq 10 times as long as it did in Kuwait. And there's another factor. In Kuwait, the oil fires were close to the sea that allowed firefighters to use seawater pumped through empty oil pipelines to battle the flames. In Iraq, it'll be more difficult. The Iraqi oil fields are further away from water, and many of the pipelines to its ports are badly run down after a dozen years of the UN embargo. The question, of course, is whether Saddam Hussein will do to his own country what he did to Kuwait. Some see the well fires reported today as an indication that he will.
Saddam, in my estimation, is behaving exactly as I anticipated he would.
For Kurt Abram, figuring out what Saddam is likely to do next is part of his job as an editor of World Oil Magazine of Houston.
Worst case scenario to me takes on several attributes. First of all would be that our friend Saddam succeeds in torching a majority of the wells in Iraq. Furthermore, you would look at the environmental damage that would be done. The third leg of this would be just the tremendous disadvantage this would put the Iraqi people on as far as a recovery into some kind of acceptable, normal, sovereign state.
It would indeed. The world could do quite well without their oil, with supplies from other sources. But for Iraq, it would be disastrous. All plans for the reconstruction of the country, once this war is over, depend on paying for it with oil revenues. An oil field firestorm would deprive Iraq of tens of billions of dollars and take years. Western donor countries would have to take up the slack, but relying on their generosity and the patience of their taxpayers is not likely to do much to relieve the misery of the Iraqi people. For The National, I'm Joe Schlesinger.
Well, it's The National for this Thursday night. Remember, you can get news about the fighting in Iraq on the hour, on Newsworld, and at any time on our website at cbc.ca. I'm Peter Mansbridge. Thanks for watching.
Good evening, everyone. The Pentagon says the real war, the attack that will shock and awe, has yet to happen.
That's true, but tonight the darkest war truth also became reality. We have our first American casualties. 4 American Marines and 12 British Royal Commandos died tonight when their chopper crashed about 9 miles from Iraq's border in a friendly area of Kuwait. The crew was returning from a mission on board a CH-46 Sea Knight. Officials say it appears the crash was an accident. There were no reports of enemy fire in the area. And also tonight, this new video taken by ABC News in southern Iraq just less than an hour ago shows the ground movement well underway. This is the 3rd Infantry Division, which left Kuwait for Iraq more than 7 hours ago. We have team coverage tonight, obviously, but we are going to begin overseas in Doha, Qatar, where Jeff Morell is standing by. Jeff?
This is G-Day, the day on which the ground invasion begins in earnest. A column of 10,000 vehicles from the Army's 3rd Infantry Division has just now entered Iraq.
At daybreak, the full-scale ground invasion began. U.S. tanks and armored vehicles stormed into Iraq from Kuwait. But on this second day of combat, the coalition suffered its first casualties. A Marine chopper like this one crashed in Kuwait. There were 16 U.S. and British Marines on board. All are presumed dead. Meanwhile, in the northern Iraq city of Mosul, there are reports of huge explosions. Similar reports in the southern port city of Basra. They may be the first coalition strikes on urban areas outside Baghdad. The Iraqi capital sustained another night of cruise missile attacks, more than 24 aimed mostly at government ministries and military targets. Iraqi radio reports Saddam Hussein's family home was hit, but no one was injured. However, government officials claim 37 civilians were injured in this attack, including several children. Earlier in the day, the Pentagon warned Iraqis to stay home.
Do not go to work. Stay away from military targets and any facilities where Saddam Hussein has moved military assets.
The Pentagon says this is still not the all-out air assault designed to shock and awe, but rather what they call a preparatory attack. Just as the ground invasion began with a small incursion of U.S. and British troops, artillery fire paved the way for soldiers and Marines to cross the border into Iraq. And ABC News reporter Mike Seary says the Marines he's embedded with have encountered little resistance as they race to Baghdad.
We are getting some reports from some of the lead vehicles that they are seeing some soldiers surrendering, or at least standing on their trucks and not demonstrating any hostile intentions.
Kuwait remains on edge. Air raid sirens have repeatedly forced soldiers to don gas masks and protective suits. Civilians have sought refuge in underground bunkers.
Iraq has launched at least 2 missiles at Kuwait, but both were shot down by U.S. Patriot missiles. Meanwhile, the fate of Saddam Hussein is still unknown. Though he has appeared on Iraqi television twice since the opening attack, there are those in the U.S. government who are convinced he was killed. Reporting live from Doha, I'm Jeff Morrell, ABC News. Now back to you.
All right, Jeff, as you were just mentioning, Pentagon officials have yet to say publicly whether they think Saddam Hussein is dead or alive. But tonight, the Washington Post is reporting there are several indications that Hussein and possibly his 2 sons were inside a Baghdad compound that American missiles struck last night. Meanwhile, government experts have been comparing video we showed you last night of Saddam's speech with pictures from Sunday to see if last night's video is Hussein himself or possibly a look-alike. And ABC News is reporting that Hussein's former mistress has told our government that the man in last night's video is not Hussein. Our military expert, Boston University professor Andrew Bacevich, says if Saddam is alive, he may very well be out of touch.
That leadership attack, even if it didn't kill Saddam Hussein, might have had the effect of cutting off Saddam Hussein and making it more difficult for him to give orders. In other words, it might have damaged the communications.
And late today, Iraqi television aired this videotape showing Saddam Hussein meeting with his cabinet. Anthony?
All right, Liz, with war underway, the nation's terrorism threat level remains high at code orange, and tonight, authorities continue to track terrorism. Tests confirm 2 vials found Monday inside a Paris train station contained traces of the deadly poison ricin. It was found in a luggage, in a locker at the Gare de Lyon station in Paris. ABC News reports authorities had the locker under surveillance for days, and authorities believe they may have disrupted a plot to use ricin or other poisons against U.S. targets in France or Italy. The ricin is also said to match that found in raids in London earlier this year. Ricin is highly poisonous and is derived from the castor bean plant. It can kill within days, and there is absolutely no treatment for that. Meanwhile, the FBI has issued a worldwide alert tonight for this man, a possible al-Qaeda operative who has spent time in the U.S. 27-year-old Saudi national Adnan al-Sheikh Rajuma lived in South Florida in 2001, and a senior law enforcement official says he may have received flight training like the September 11th hijackers. The FBI says al-Sheikh Rajuma may be working with al-Qaeda to plot terrorist attacks against the U.S. Al-Shukr Juma's name was found in documents seized when al-Qaeda leader Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was arrested this month in Pakistan. Liz?
Anthony, though we still do not know the exact damage done by today's bombings, this is the best visual we have of the destruction in Baghdad. Now, this video aired on Italian television just after 1 o'clock this afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. It was, of course, nighttime in Iraq when American cruise missiles destroyed a number of Baghdad buildings. Iraqi television reported that 37 people were injured, though that has not been confirmed by other media outlets. News Center 5's David Muir is the only local reporter in the Persian Gulf, and he joins us live from Doha, Qatar, with more on tonight's ground movement. David?
Liz and Anthony, it is 7 in the morning here in Qatar, and overnight here in the Persian Gulf, the U.S. Army and Marines made significant progress as they crossed over the Kuwaiti border and into southern Iraq. These are images that we received just a short time ago of the 3rd Infantry Division. This is a division, a tank company of some 15 tanks, 100 soldiers. We understand that these troops did come into contact with several Iraqi armored personnel carriers along the way, destroying at least 3 of them. Now, there are no reports of any U.S. casualties. Under the nighttime sky, as bombs continued to fall, the 1st Marine Division also rolled into southern Iraq around 9 p.m. last night, our time. Now, they also skirmished with Iraqi troops, and again, there are no reports of any American casualties. Now, the Marines did witness burning oil wells on their way in, and their goal has been to get as far north before daylight this morning. They were wearing their masks and chemical suits as a precaution, and one embedded journalist, Mike Saray, with the Marines, shared with us what he could about his journey all night.
I cannot give you our location. The main thing, though, is we got through, we breached the line, went through the concertina wire, and got through rather quickly and did not get any opposition until just about 15 minutes ago. We're still moving forward here, and I'll probably cut out as we accelerate. I may have to get under cover here for a bit. We're maybe engaging a couple of the tanks here.
And now, what Mike can't share with us what the Marine Division is about to do in their location, we can share with you that the 3rd Infantry Division will now move into what's called a combat formation. They'll basically spread out their tanks so they can move northward a bit more quickly. And I say a bit because quickly to them means 15 miles per hour to allow them to move northward at a more rapid pace. Now, the ground invasion, we should point out, happened earlier than the military was planning, after Iraq retaliated yesterday, which would have been this morning your time, with Scud missiles. They fired them over the Iraqi border into Kuwait, where troops are stationed, creating havoc there for the troops. Anthony and Liz?
David, I'm sure Saddam Hussein has claimed that he does not possess Scud missiles. In fact, he says he destroyed them, even though we know that he used them in the Iraqi war back in 1991, the Gulf War, I should say. People must have been terrified there today, worried that these Scuds were the same missiles.
You know, these troops, Liz, have been trained on how to put on these gas masks in 9 seconds. And they had to put those skills to the test this morning, your time, yesterday, our time, getting on their suits just to be prepared. And throughout Kuwait City, the sirens also rang every time there was a signal that one of these missiles could be coming in, creating havoc in that city as well. In fact, some of the images show people working at the hotels, the bellhops, actually trying to frantically get guests into the hotel and down into the bunker. This was a scene repeated a dozen times yesterday in Kuwait City. We saw journalists actually on the air have to put on their gas masks. And I'll be honest with you, the photographer who is here with me, Curtis Bailey from Boston, and I saw those images, and it reminded us that we have to have our gas masks on nearby. There haven't been any warnings here in Qatar, no need to even wear them. But yesterday, those images brought home the reality that we all have to be prepared for anything that could happen. A couple other signs here in Qatar that security has been tightened. Here at the hotel where we're staying, they've actually put up a metal detector at the front door. We have new security guards. The elevator won't even work unless we slide a card in the elevator. And as I mentioned earlier this week, we have been able to see C-130 military transport planes flying overhead here. Last night, before the sun came up here this morning, a combat plane went overhead with its lights off. The only way we knew the plane was going over was because of the moon illuminating the plane in the sky. Anthony, Liz?
All right, David, I should point out it's Kuwaiti officials who are claiming that those are Scud missiles, although ABC News has said also that they are not sure that they are Scud missiles today.
Not clear if it's Scud or not, and the Patriot missiles, though, did knock at least one of them
That's the good news.
down, and still trying to determine exactly where those came from and what exactly they were.
Thank you very much, David, for reporting from Doha for us.
All right, the onset of war in Iraq drew out thousands of anti-war protesters around the world. In Paris, protesters burned American and British flags in one of Dozens of European protests against the war.
In this country, thousands of protesters tied up traffic in downtown Chicago tonight. Large rallies were also held in New York City's Times Square and in San Francisco. And right here in Boston, an estimated 4,000 anti-war activists marched from Copley Square to City Hall and back to protest the war. News Center 5's Amalia Beretta is live in Boston. She has more on this local opposition. Amalia?
Liz, quite an eventful day on the streets of Boston today as protesters marched through the city and rallied against the war, at times numbering in the thousands. The protesters were loud but peaceful until tonight when things got out of hand. As the day-long protest concluded, trouble. Boston police officers clashed with protesters who were pushing to get on the Newbury Street on-ramp to the Mass Pike. One protester screamed as he appeared to throw himself under a police motorcycle that nearly ran him over. The commotion ended with 2 arrests. Earlier in the evening, it had been a raucous arrival onto Copley Square. Hundreds of chanting student protesters called for the impeachment of George W. Bush for the war he launched on Iraq.
I think that diplomacy needed to be tried again and again and again. War is such a last resort.
I personally feel that Bush has a personal vendetta out, and he's using his power to finish what his father started.
The people have to change this. They have to choose that they want democracy, and they have to end his fascist regime. It's not up to us. It's not our job.
The students were joined by the occasional nearby residents sympathetic to their cause.
I'm here because I think this war is immoral, and we have no business perpetuating violence.
We're causing a 9/11 in Iraq, and I don't think that's the answer. It's definitely not the way to go.
Earlier in the day, it had been a much larger gathering, estimated at times to number 4,000 student protesters. They marched from Cambridge up the Back Bay to City Hall Plaza. The students, mostly from Harvard, MIT, Tufts, and BU. No official estimates on the number of protesters tonight, but the crowd clearly was smaller than it was earlier in the day. I know that our pictures at times gave the impression that Copley Plaza was full of people tonight, but that was not the case. The crowd tonight probably closer to 400 to 500 people. Reporting live from Boston, I'm Amalia Beretta, News Center 5 tonight. Back to you, Liz and Anthony.
All right, Amalia, thank you. And while there are people who are protesting the war, there are people who are supporting our troops. And one Dorchester man is leading his own charge to help those troops.
Philip Carver's brother is serving in the Marines overseas, but back in Boston via email, Philip has built his own army of volunteers. News Center 5's Steve Sprague is live with this story now, new at 11. Steve?
Well, Anthony, Philip started 2 weeks ago with an idea. It has since grown to include a number of people here in Dorchester, the elementary schools in this community, as well as folks in Sharon and in Dedham. The concept is very simple. While you're out grocery shopping, pick up an item or two that soldiers could use in the desert, and then in 2 weeks, come to this VFW post here in Dorchester and help mail them off as part of a care package. It was a sandstorm like this which spawned the idea for the care packages.
We talked to my brother the other day. He's been in his tent for 48 hours due to a sandstorm with 30 other guys in his platoon, and the sand is everywhere. So I guess they use the baby wipes and the hand creams constantly.
But Peter Carver couldn't get a hold of those supplies where the 42-year-old Marine is stationed in Kuwait. So his younger brother began collecting them.
So I started to do a care package to send over to my brother. And then I got the idea, well, if he needed it, then all of them must need it. There must be a shortage. So I got a group of my friends together, and we decided to do a drive called Dorchester SOS, Supports Our Soldiers.
So Philip sent emails to everybody in his internet address book telling them about the idea. And now it's become a community-wide event aimed at helping as many soldiers as possible overseas.
We hope through the Dorchester SOS to mail 50 care packages, but with 20 things for 20 different people. So it will touch up to 1,000 soldiers overseas.
And even if Operation Iraqi Freedom ends in the next week or so, Philip says the need is still going to be there because those soldiers will be stationed in the desert region for months to come, and they'll still need those care packages. Reporting live from Dorchester, I'm Steve Sprazier, News Center 5 tonight. Anthony.
The administration's ratings, the Bush administration's, are weaker than they were in 1991. But more importantly, on the war, here is the headline. The president's rating for handling the situation with Iraq is at 65%. His father's comparable rating at the beginning of the Gulf War was 80%. But public backing for the war is fairly steady tonight after spiking after the president set that 48-hour deadline for Saddam Hussein and his two sons to get out of the country. 72% of Americans support the war and 53% support it strongly, which is roughly the same as Monday night. But as you have seen, not just in the Arab world and not just overseas today, but there has been a fairly vigorous, on this first real day of combat in some arenas, there has been a very vigorous anti-war feeling in many parts of the country and overseas. And we asked ABC's Dean Reynolds to put together a roundup for us.
Having failed to stop the war, many demonstrators in this country today simply settled for stopping traffic.
It's our right, and we have that right, and we need to protest, and we need to be out here, and we need to be talking about these issues.
This was Chicago tonight, with several thousand demonstrators bent on clogging Lakeshore Drive. They succeeded, but they picked a day on which police presence downtown was very heavy. At times, the standoff turned violent, and there were a number of arrests. And this was San Francisco today, the financial district at a standstill. At times, there were fierce clashes reminiscent of past protests against long-ago wars. This evening, as the protests proceeded, San Francisco police officials said the demonstrators had turned the city into, quote, absolute anarchy, and more than 1,000 arrests were made.
This war is going to be the last!
Many of the protests, including this one in Philadelphia, had been planned to coincide with the start of the war. So demonstrators headed for the streets. They were oblivious to the rain pounding Key Bridge this morning as they crossed the Potomac into the nation's capital.
We're going to live through this. The Iraqis won't. It's totally worth it.
They demonstrated at state capitals in Michigan and in New Hampshire, and even in Texas, George W. Bush's home state. A protest in Austin, not far from where one of the president's daughters attends college. Most of the demonstrators in this country said they were angry with the president and were not trying to undermine American troops, but get them home safely. Overseas, though, the U.S. armed forces were seen as agents of a grand scheme to impose America's will on the Middle East.
American and British troops get out of Iraq.
Thousands marched in Egypt, which gets more U.S. foreign aid than any country but Israel.
The American occupation of Iraq is the occupation of the entire Arab world.
There were clashes with police in Seoul, South Korea. Anger over the war could be seen in Japan, in the Philippines, and in Australia, all U.S. allies. In Jordan, the government said this must stop or protesters will be dealt with swiftly and harshly. A huge crowd confronted the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia, and big anti-American protests were recorded in Berlin as well as in Moscow. Protesters were there, too, in the shadow of London's Big Ben today, just a few feet from where the British Parliament approved their nation's military role in the conflict. And in Paris tonight, the strains over this war were vividly on display as a crowd mounted an attack on a symbol of America, not an embassy, a McDonald's. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, Chicago.
It's very hard for a lot of Americans to swallow the degree of anti-American, anti-administration protest that exists in many countries. And you know, of course, that the administration began this day by talking about the increasing size of the coalition of the willing, and various appearances by the administration officials, most notably the president's spokesperson, made the point, comes from many nations and it's growing. There are only two principal allies in the military coalition, and that is Britain with about 40,000 and Australia with a very small contingent of, I think it is 2,000 or 3,000. But even in those two countries there has been deep opposition to the war, and we do not know whether or not it will continue, but will not be surprised if it does. This is ABC News continuing live coverage of the war with Iraq. I'm Peter Jennings again at ABC, or still perhaps is a more accurate word, at ABC News headquarters. It is now midnight in the east, 9 o'clock Pacific time, and it is 8 o'clock in the morning in Baghdad. And we try to begin every hour with some kind of where we are at this time of the day. It is well past first light in Baghdad. There has been no attack on Baghdad for many hours now. We know that the administration is trying very hard, as are various intelligence agencies in a variety of countries, trying to figure out what happened with this major U.S. attack on what has been described as a leadership bunker in Baghdad. We know that both the Marines and the Army have now breached the line of departure on the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border and gone across. There's been some air activity in the north because the Kurds have given the U.S. Permission to fly across Turkey at the moment, but according at least to a Kurdish representative we spoke to a while ago, no particular combat in the north. And we are sad to report, and Bob Brown will report in detail in this summary, that the first American casualties have occurred. 4 Americans and 8 British members of the Royal Marines, we're told, were killed when a Marine helicopter, a Sea King, went down inside Kuwait, returning from a mission at the eastern edge of the battlefront up near Basra and Qasr on the waterway, which is Iraq's only access to the sea. We do not know what has happened. The Pentagon has simply been forthcoming enough to tell us that there were 4 Marines. They've not been identified, at least to us, and that is surely pending the notification of next of kin. Whatever one's views about the war, very difficult for Marine and Army, Air Force and Navy families all across the country tonight to be watching this unfold on television to a far greater degree than it ever has before, and wondering, not to put too fine a point at what the hell is going on. At any rate, ABC's Bob Brown has been back and looked at the day, so to begin yet another hour, and in the case of the Eastern Time Zone, another day, here is a summary of the last 24 hours.
The second 24 hours of fighting has been marked so far by the movement of American and British troops into Iraq and toward the southern city of Basra. It still isn't known whether the Iraqis are putting up resistance. There are reports from the Pentagon that military authorities have received encouraging signs from some Republican Guard units. The Pentagon has also confirmed the first reported casualties of the war. 16 British and American servicemen have died in a helicopter crash in Kuwait after conducting operations related to the invasion of Iraq. In the first 24 hours, a number of questions were posed. What will characterize a full-scale coalition offensive, which authorities say still has not begun despite new attacks? What is the state of law enforcement on the home front amid concerns over terrorist activities? And is this really Saddam Hussein or a double? That last question arose when this man appeared on Iraqi television to issue a defiant response to the first U.S. attack last night, an attack aimed at taking out members of the Iraqi leadership. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld left the answer open.
The damage assessment on the compound is pending.
But voice analysts expressed the opinion that the speaker was Hussein. The Washington Post reports that U.S. officials believe Saddam Hussein and his sons were still in their compound when it was hit. In his press conference, Rumsfeld did offer his view of the eventual nature of the war that had just begun.
It will be of a force and scope and scale that has been beyond what has been seen before.
Rumsfeld spoke a few hours after a half-dozen alarms had gone off in Kuwait City, triggering gas mask alerts as a result of Iraqi missiles that had been fired toward Kuwait City and over the positions of U.S. forces. The Pentagon said 2 of those missiles were destroyed by U.S. Patriot 3 missiles. There were no reports of casualties or of chemical or biological agents. There were reports that several oil wells near the southern city of Basra had been set afire, and that contributed to speculation as to whether the U.S. might alter its carefully prepared plans for an invasion. To at least some extent, the schedule was advanced, according to ABC's Mike Saray. Moving across the Iraqi border with U.S. Marines from the 1st Expeditionary Force, Saray reported that the invasion started about 12 hours earlier than had been planned.
This invasion got launched early because of serious intelligence reports of a mass buildup of enemy tanks just north of our position, and because of reports of some oil fires I think the decision was made to go in sooner than expected.
Reporters accompanying the Marines say they now have seen fires flickering on the nighttime horizon. As the Marines moved in to secure positions in Iraq, military authorities characterized the advance not as a full-scale attack, but still as part of the preparation. Troops from the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division, still on the Kuwait side of the border, unleashed heavy artillery fire into Iraq, but no fire was returned. A second round of air attacks was launched against Baghdad. British as well as American ships fired Tomahawk cruise missiles into government buildings west of the Tigris River. And despite the smoke and fire, authorities said this still was not the beginning of the massive air campaign that has been threatened. Demonstrations against the war were staged in both Syria and Egypt. Riot police used water cannons to restrain the crowd in Cairo. 20,000 protesters turned out in Paris, where there was also a report that 2 flasks with traces of the deadly toxin ricin had been discovered in the luggage depot of a railway station, apparently for use against American interests. In this country, anti-war protests occupied police in several major cities. A protest in Chicago stopped traffic on Lakeshore Drive during the afternoon rush hour. And there were continuing anti-war demonstrations in Washington and in New York under heavy rains. New York has also placed in effect what is termed Operation Atlas, with checkpoints at every crossing into Manhattan and throughout the city in its largest anti-terrorist operation ever. There was extra protection at city landmarks and at rail stations where canine units were used to sniff baggage. The FBI also issued a terrorist alert for a 27-year-old Saudi man, Adnan G. El Shukri Juma, possibly involved with al-Qaeda, said to have received flight training in Florida, and who may have been in the Miami area before he disappeared.
They are the finest in the world.
Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair, in an address tonight, announced that British servicemen and women
out
are
in
now
Miami,
engaged in the war from land, sea, and air. The British are among the troops said to be moving toward Basra. A report that the small town of Qasr has been captured was denied by the Iraqis. With attacks underway, missiles exchanged, and the coalition having fought for its first 24 hours, the commanding general of the 1st Marine Division told his troops who will fight during the next 24 hours, engage your brain before you engage your weapon. Share your courage with each other as we enter the uncertain terrain north of the line of departure.
Those very poetic words of the Marine commander as they were going close to the line of departure. The Marines are now across, as Bob Brown has just told you. The Army is now across. And in a very long day of coverage, there have been some extraordinary moments looking not just at the military campaign, but at Baghdad itself and across the length and breadth of America and other parts of the world. And seeing just a few minutes ago that report on demonstrations against the war from ABC's Dean Reynolds. But clearly, for us at least, one of the truly memorable experiences was to see that technology now permitted us, in the person of ABC's Ted Koppel with his crew, Alex Bruckner and his wife, his cameraman and sound man, to set up on the very edge of the line of departure as the 3rd Infantry Division was pushing across into Iraq. And for about 20 or 30 minutes, I didn't realize it was quite so long at the time, Ted and I had a conversation. We've known each other for a very long time about what was happening. And so here, largely his contribution from the field is a replay of at least part of that conversation. And hey, Ted, it's yours again.
Peter, can you hear me?
Very clearly, Ted. Go ahead.
All right, excellent. I must say I was trying to think of something that would be appropriate to say on an occasion like this, and as is often the case, the best you can come up with is something that Shakespeare wrote for Henry V, wreak havoc and unleash the dogs of war. And there they start moving into Iraq. You know, I spoke to you just a few minutes ago as the very first vehicles went in. I'm going to ask the cameraman just to pan over now, and you can watch this really endless line. There's a Bradley fighting vehicle going by right now, a couple of them passing through the border, and the line stretches in the other direction as far as I can see, Peter.
And so what kind of a night has it been? For example, there's a large berm behind you which looks like it has been broken through. Is that what they spent the night doing, creating these openings?
Actually, Peter, I have a feeling that there have been engineers and special ops forces in here for quite a long time. And this last berm they just broke through, I guess, during the course of the night. There is another berm about 5 miles up. They had broken through that. They quite literally just left the barbed wire in place, although I think they'd even snipped that before the invasion began. But symbolically, that barbed wire was the last thing standing between these ground forces and Iraq.
So talk to us a little bit now about logistics, because you talked about the Abrams going in first at the moment, and they're the greatest gas guzzler in the U.S. military. So where's all the refueling trucks for them? Right behind?
The refueling trucks are coming, and Peter, I'm trying to remember now. I think there are 350 of the oil tankers. Each oil tanker carries some 5,000 gallons, and I did the math before. I couldn't do it otherwise this early in the morning. 1,750,000 gallons of fuel that they are bringing with them. And they have built a pipeline through northern Kuwait all the way to the border here. And over these next few days, among the other things they'll be doing is laying pipeline, because they're going to be pumping oil all the way up from Kuwait into Iraq, simply to support this enormous armored force.
Talk to us a little bit about the Abrams tank. It is the principal tank in the U.S. military. It is vastly superior to the Iraqi tank, even though the Iraqis have some extremely good Russian tanks.
It is the biggest, the baddest tank in the world, and they are enormously proud of it. It has got huge firepower, and it is, at least from the front, and as you know, Peter, tankers maneuver so that they can try and approach each other so that they are coming from the front. The front of the Abrams tank is essentially invulnerable to anything that any other tank can throw at it. Now, if they can get it from the top, if they can get it from the side, they can probably knock the tread off. But it's an enormously powerful tank, and it has huge firepower with it.
And once you get into Iraq, the Abrams has the extraordinary advantage over the Iraqis of being able to fight at a greater distance.
You, of course, have put your finger right on it. They can fire from a distance of over 2 miles with extraordinary accuracy, and I believe that the best that the Russian tanks have is probably about 1.25 miles, 1.5 miles. So they can stand off, and they can be killing enemy tanks, and the enemy can't even approach them.
Would you mind asking your cameraman to show us as much as we can within your limitations of the environment you're in?
I was just about to ask him to do that. Alex, if you would just turn the camera around so that they can see this long line.
This is Alex Bruckner, one
Peter,
of our...
we'll see. America has ever engaged in, and whichever way it goes, I think it's going to shift the plates of the world.
Something else you could do for us at the moment, Ted, while we just keep our camera, keep Alex pointed at the various pieces of equipment going by, is to describe a little more of the actual armament that is going in. We're looking at the Abrams now. There's an armored bulldozer, I think, behind one of those Abrams. But the capacity of this armored division is really quite extraordinary and more modern in the last 10 years since the Gulf War than anybody had ever anticipated, correct?
No, you're exactly right. And in many ways, the most modern thing about it is not even its fighting capability. I'm talking now of the Abrams tanks and the Bradley fighting vehicle, but the communications that exist in each one of these vehicles with command, which is also mobile. We have a fairly significant command post, mobile command post, that is occupied by General Blunt. And inside he has both satellite capabilities, computer capabilities. All this information is fed into the computers and can be immediately transmitted not over field telephone, but immediately transmitted by touching the screen. The icons will move, and he can give directions to any of these tank commanders. I mean, quite literally, an individual tank commander, or they, if they are going into action, can communicate back to the commanding general, who can then distribute the information all around. So the communications, I would say, is the biggest difference in terms of their fighting capability right now. I'd like, Peter, just to draw your attention, Alex, if you could just get a shot of that. You see the panel on the side of the tank?
Or on
the
Bradley.
Corrugated panel, Peter, on the side of the tank?
I do. That's actually the Bradley we're looking
yes.
at. Yeah.
Thank you. That's yes, you are right. We are looking at a Bradley.
Right.
That corrugated panel enables. There were a lot of instances of fratricide during Operation Desert Storm, and those panels allow any fighting vehicle out here and any aircraft to immediately identify that vehicle as belonging to the U.S. Army. So they are hoping that the instances of fratricide will be kept down to an absolute minimum.
And maybe you could ask Alex to pan back for just a second to the left to pick up those guys who have, to their great relief, I think, got out of the back of their Bradley fighting vehicle. It's slightly misnamed as a fighting vehicle. It does have a 25-millimeter cannon on the top, and it does have an additional machine gun, but it is principally a transporter of men. And if they have to sit in the back, they tell us that it's a good, decent accommodation for 6 people, and sometimes they've got 10 people in the back. And if you've got 7 or 8 people in full chemical suits, as you've seen Ted wearing at the moment, it is about as uncomfortable as you can get. And you do not want to be a driver of a Bradley fighting vehicle, I think, Ted, if you're taller than 5'4".
I'm just a little bit taller than 5'4", and I was inside a Bradley fighting vehicle the other day, and you're absolutely right. Very, very little room. The squads, actually, you're leading into an interesting line of discussion, because the Bradley fighting vehicle normally takes a squad of 7. But in point of fact, the infantryman, as you and I remember him from World War II days or Korean days or even Vietnam, the days of the infantrymen are not quite over, but they are certainly diminished. This is a mechanized infantry division, and out of 20,000 men, only 1,200 of them are actually infantrymen in the sense of, on occasion, having to get out and walk. This is not one of those occasions. Everybody rides today.
I just wanted to add one more thing, and perhaps you can do it even better than I can, about these thermal imaging panels which are on the side. They're sometimes on the roof. You can also see them, for example, on that vehicle just going by. You can see them on the back of a fighting vehicle as well. But this is another example of the extraordinary technology which is available to U.S. forces this time, because it is the heat pattern from trucks and jeeps and Bradley fighting vehicles and tanks that airplanes and gunners pick up through their thermal imaging devices. Have I got that right, Ted?
That's exactly right. Now, those side panels, of course, would be visible to other ground forces.
Right.
What they have is a special tape that is put on top of each of these vehicles, and that tape is visible from, I'm told, 13,000 feet up.
I grant you, it is quite an amazing sight to see. You said, I thought, 10,000 vehicles in this entire movement of the 3rd Infantry Division moving forward?
That's exactly right. And there you see one of the tankers going through, and the men, you should know, have been told that they were to bring enough MREs, meals ready to eat, enough food for 5 to 7 days, enough water for 5 to 7 days, and that adds up to an enormous amount of water, because out here, Peter, it's still quite brisk and chilly because it's shortly after dawn. The sun is just rising. But the men here are told that they should try to consume 3 liters of water every day. And so 3 liters of water per man times 7, just to carry 21 liters of water for each man. You can imagine how stuffed those vehicles are. And if you look at the side of them, you can see that the men's duffel bags are on the side. One of the things that everyone is concerned about, of course, is if in the wonderful new parlance of the modern GI, if they get slimed. They borrowed that, of course, from Ghostbusters.
Right.
What they're talking about is if they get hit by chemical or biological weapons, everything on the outside of these vehicles is gone. All of their gear, which they tend to hang from the outside of these Bradleys and these tanks, has to be disposed of because they're not going to be able to save it.
But as we watch these tanks, and there again is an armored bulldozer going forward, reminded to add the importance of these panels on all of these vehicles, because in Desert Storm in 1991, looking back at my fact book, Friendly Fire, fratricide, as it's often referred to in the military, or blue on blue casualties, accounted for 24% of U.S. combat deaths. So this is not only a huge but a necessary step forward. Ted, I must say, the microphone you're using will remind some of our viewers of reporting from Britain during the Second World War, because that's a exterior sound suppressing microphone, which you very rarely ever see in the field.
Yeah, which, well, you and I call them lip mics, and we use them when there's a lot of extraneous noise. And as you can imagine, with all this heavy armor rolling by, we thought there would be so much noise that if we used one of our more modern and tinier microphones, all you would hear is the sound of the armor, and we wouldn't be able to talk to one another.
All right. Ted, while you and I have been chatting, our principal military analyst, Tony Cordesman, has been listening to us. If we could just keep your camera up for a second, we'll invite Tony to come in and give us some sense of the overall tactic here, Tony, for
Absolutely.
the 3rd Infantry Division.
Well, I think one of the keys, Peter, here, and what you're seeing by going into the desert, is to try to avoid all of the regular Iraqi units as long as possible. You probably may even be able to drive the Republican Guards back on Baghdad. That gives the Army the maximum speed. The difficulty where Ted is, we're not sure of the position he's using. It's easy to draw these lines on the map, but sooner or later, there are bridge crossings. You have to go across the Euphrates. If you go into that main road, there's something like 40 bridges in that area. And there are Republican Guards divisions in here. There's the possibility of chemical weapons. And you've got 2 corps of the regular Army. Now, if the regular Army stays in place because of the air, if the Republican Guards is cut up, and Ted's forces, the forces Ted's with, can move through these areas, we could be in Baghdad in a couple of days. If the Iraqis fight well and the U.S. and British forces meet serious resistance, it could be a different story.
You use the phrase corps with reference to the Iraqi army. What is a corps in Iraqi terms?
Well, it differs according to where they are, but down in the area in the south, there is 1 corps with 3 divisions. That's a heavy corps by the standards of the Iraqis. It has a mechanized division, an armored division, and an infantry division. There's another regular Army corps that has 3 divisions, but only one of those divisions has real tank strength. The other 2 are infantry. And again, when we look at the forces Ted is with, these U.S. forces are all professional, all trained, all volunteers. In the Iraqi forces, almost all of the infantry divisions are low-grade conscripts. Many of them are Shiite. Some of them even are assimilated Kurds. They have far less incentive to fight, very little training, very little professionalism.
Let me call on now someone who has more experience with this than the rest of us all put together, and that's Major General William Nash, who's one of our analysts. He's currently a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City, based in Washington, but in the Gulf War, he was commander of the 1st Brigade of the 3rd Armored Division, which is now defunct, during Desert Storm, and they were part of the main attack from Saudi Arabia into Iraq and fought the Republican Guard. So, General Nash, if you wouldn't mind, as we watch this procession of tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles and bridge-building equipment go by, what would you be thinking? For one thing, where is the air cover at the moment, or is it necessary?
Well, I'm sure that General
General Buford's got his air cavalry assets out in front of the division at this point, conducting reconnaissance and surveillance to his front and flanks as he moves through. There's no need for air cover over the column, the fact that the Iraqi forces don't pose an air threat to him. What he's trying to do now is get the division through the berms. The brigade commanders and the battalion commanders, as soon as they clear the berm areas, they'll go into combat formations that will allow the column, though, to widen. The forces will widen. They will also be able to close up, and they'll start picking up the pace of their movement to around 15 miles an hour across the desert.
Now, if you wouldn't mind doing the math for us, just break it down for people who are not so familiar. How many men and how much equipment in a division? How many men and the equipment in a battalion? And break it down even further, how much equipment and how many men in a